The economy has two foundational markets. Only one gets rescued. If a marketplace collapses without a shareholder to notice, is it still a crisis? My name is Sarah Trumbull. I'm the founder and CEO of the Job Applicant Perspective, the first anonymous user reviews for job ads across the U.S. Level of go-to-market awareness. It comes from my Substack. And I do this in video and audio format because I'm running a paradigm shift, and so you got to meet people where they're at. Yeah. I'm a structural systems theorist, and I call myself a dive bar economist because I come into economics through systems theory. So, it's not looking at it exactly the same. But sometimes you need someone to blunder through your field from the outside. Look at it with new, fresh eyes, like a rookie detective sort of thing. It's the way I see it anyway. All right, I guess let's start from the beginning here. Here's the truth. The job market isn't American Idol. It's the stock market for the working class. It's access to financial safety and security, food, clothing, shelter, and healthcare, and if they're exceptionally lucky, retirement. The job market and the stock market are almost two sides of the same economic quarter. A functioning economy needs both. It cannot run on capital that is permanently insulated while the labor beneath it is completely exposed, any more than a coin can be heads on both faces. And the reality is, the two sides were never risking the same asset. When a stock market collapses, it destroys excess capital, money that was by definition a surplus. It was invested precisely because the investor could survive its loss. When the floor falls out from under a financial market, the emergency is real, but so is the institutional cushion underneath it. Bankruptcy protections, federal deposit insurance, and a treasury that can print the difference. When a labor market collapses, it destroys something with no cushion underneath it at all. The hours of people who, by the very virtue of being in the labor market, have no free hours to give. A worker spending 40 unpaid hours a week applying, tailoring resumes, screening, and waiting is not risking money they can afford to lose. They are spending the only finite asset they possess at the exact moment they can least afford to spend it. There is no deposit insurance for a Tuesday you will never get back, for the wedding for your family that you didn't go to. It doesn't exist. There's so many stories here. I just can't. This is not a metaphor. It is an economic claim. These are identical macroeconomic events carrying the exact same consequences for civic, social, and political safety, met with two entirely conflicting public responses. One failure is instantly labeled a systemic crisis. Trillions of dollars are deployed to protect the capital of those impacted with zero structural behavioral change required. The other failure is ignored entirely, requiring no accountability from the gatekeepers who very obviously engineered it. While the people absorbing the damage are told that a systemic harm they are experiencing is a personal character flaw, even from the government they hired to protect them from this happening. Heads, it's a bailout. Tails, it's your fault. Neutral, academic, journalistic nonsense. Who this is for? The breakdown is for anyone trying to bridge the gap between economic rhetoric and lived reality. Specifically, it's written for job seekers who've been told their unemployment is a character flaw, want to understand the actual economic mechanism driving their isolation, not another hollow platitude about grit. Anyone who watched billions move overnight to insulate a failing financial institution and wondered why the same government couldn't move a fraction of that leverage to protect the people who lost their jobs their homes, or their footing in the economy they did not design, they weren't consulted on, and their feedback had no impact on. Economists, policy staffers, and journalists trying to dissect why phrases like labor shortage and skills gaps are consistently reported as macroeconomic facts without anyone checking the structural math the way they would audit a bank's balance sheet. And honest to God, cui bono, cui bono. Talent shortage, who would that profit? Think hard. Anyone who has ever told the system doesn't work anymore and wants the actual historical receipts for exactly when and how it stopped. September 2008, Capitol gets a cushion. On September 6, 2008, the federal government placed Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac into conservatorship. It remains one of the most precisely dated interventions in modern economic history. A specific Saturday, a specific press announcement, and a specific transfer of toxic liability from private shareholders directly to the American public. What followed was fast, massive, and largely unconditional. The Treasury immediately committed up to $100 billion to each company, U.S. Department of Treasury. By the time the dust settled, taxpayers had supplied between $187 billion to $191 billion in direct cash injections. On the more rigorous fair value accounting economists prefer, which measures the true market cost of the risk assumed rather than just the cash later unpaid. The real value of the taxpayer cushion was closer to $311 billion at the moment the intervention was signed. That is completely separate from the Federal Reserve's roughly $112 billion lifeline to AIG, and before the broader $700 billion safety net authorized under TARP. You see what I mean? To understand how completely the system protects capital, we have to run the event through the only diagnostic questions that matter. Number one, who bore the risk before the response? Shareholders and, on paper, corporate executives. Yet very few executives personally lost what their shareholder lost, and none were asked to sacrifice their livelihood to qualify for help. How fast did relief arrive, and with what conditions? Within days, Congress had already handed the Treasury what contemporary reports called a virtual blank check. Within days, Congress had reportedly handed the Treasury what contemporary reports called a virtual blank check that previous July. There was no means test, no mandatory work requirement, no demand that the financial institutions prove they had fixed their predatory lending practices before the billions began to move. What was the public narrative? The word bailout was deliberately avoided to control public perception. Instead, officials relied on sterile clinical terms: conservatorship, stabilization, systemic risk. The narrative insisted this wasn't a reward for reckless behavior. It was a structural fire that had to be contained. Asking moral questions about accountability while the house was burning was treated as besides the point. Was the underlying structure regulated afterwards? Only partially. While the Dodd-Frank Act introduced genuine oversight, Fannie and Freddie remain in federal conservatorship to this day. Nearly 2 decades later, an institutional arrangement nobody quite calls permanent, but nobody dares to end. This is exactly what it looks like when a system designed to protect capital breaks. The institutions and individuals responsible for the damage are deemed too interconnected and too important to let fail. Now, look what happens when an economic system collapses, but it impacts the American people en masse directly instead of the shareholder class. 2005, the collapse with no ticker symbol. There is no date most people could name for this one. There was no Saturday morning press conference, no ticker symbol crashing red, and no Treasury Secretary standing at a podium explaining what had to be done before the market opened on Monday. That complete absence of public theater is not incidental. It's the exact reason the collapse never received a rescue. But there is a date, if you know where to look for it. 2005, the year Taleo, then the leading enterprise applicant tracking system, went public on the NASDAQ under the ticker TLEO. That was our IPO prospectus at the SEC. This was the moment the machinery for profiting from keeping Americans out of employment at scale stopped being a private equity-backed niche tool and became publicly capitalized infrastructure, the default backbone of hiring itself. It sat at the end of a decade of build-up. Early web-based hiring platforms, the late 1990s to Monster.com among them, and just ahead of the cloud-based systems that scaled the model to an extreme after 2008. If Fannie and Freddie's conservatorship is the day liability flipped from private state shareholders to the public, 2005 is the year the economic cost of screening a job applicant flipped from the employer to the worker en masse. Before this shift, filtering candidates cost employers real money. Physical dollars per job posting, per mail response, sometimes even per word. That transactional cost forced a level of market discipline. An employer who wasted people's time directly paid for it in their own income statement. After the shift, the marginal cost of rejecting an applicant dropped to absolute zero. An employer could post a single opening, receive 1,000 applications, and never pay a single cent to any of the 990 candidates who would never hear a word back. Top 5% of candidates is a 95% failure rate. As a selling point, a 95% failure rate in a coordination market for the survival of the entire American citizenry was a selling point for employers. Category errors are absolutely wild. The ATS industry was hired by U.S. employers that rely on the economy to exist at all, to generate revenue from the unpaid labor of people whose whole job was to prevent access to employment in a market they could not opt out of, while white labeling its presence so they couldn't choose job ads that didn't include it. And the ATS industry openly told everyone in public marketing on purpose. Even better too, employers, public policy, and workforce boards signed up for it while claiming expertise in economics and business, as if that is not openly announcing innovating keystone market failure that all other markets rely on as a selling point. Chinese foot binding for the entire economy, people's safety, political stability. Let's run this automated collapse through the exact same 4 diagnostic questions. Who bore the risk? Individual job seekers spending endless unpaid hours manually tailoring resumes to outwit arbitrary keyword filters, submitting to rigid screening interfaces, and wading through deafening silence. Unlike in investors' capital, this time was not surplus. It was the only primary asset the people spending it possessed. How fast did relief arrive, and with what conditions? It didn't arrive at all. There have been no federal regulation of applicant tracking practices, no legal cap on unpaid technical assessments, and no requirement that a company respond to an applicant it screens. 2 decades in, it's just created an ever-degrading loop of economic and psychological strain on the citizenry, while the scale of the harm machine keeps growing. Indeed, in Glassdoor's parent company reported, and Recruit Holdings reported an average of 23 hires per minute across the platform in calendar year 2023, against 350 million monthly unique visitors to Indeed alone. That is a ratio that works out to roughly 0.3% conversion rate. It's a calculation of mine. it's a conservative one, since it treats each monthly visitor count as a distinct person across the year. There is still no equivalent of deposit insurance for the hours a worker wastes being categorized by software that is never obligated to explain its math. Can you imagine? They are so disconnected that they reported it in their fiscal year reports as if it was a win. Can you imagine reporting to your logistics company, reporting to people that it dropped 99.7% of the boxes it had that controlled everybody's ability to eat? Yes. And the investors are so out of touch that they didn't even notice. Wild. What was the public's narrative? Not systemic risk, the exact opposite. Skills gaps, talent shortage, no one wants to work. The workforce absorbing the cost of a mathematically obvious market design failure was told the failure was a moral and personal failing. The narrative survived even when the data said otherwise. Harvard Business School's hidden workers research put the numbers of qualified, motivated people long-term profitably unemployed to the talent industry at 27 million against a U.S. labor force of roughly 165 million. That's about 16% of the workforce for 2 years or more profitably unemployed to the talent industry. The regulatory apparatus that could have forced transparency here chose not to. SEC's human capital management related rules remain unenforced while their archives hold nothing but documentation of the scale of the economic design failure that's been going on for decades. Robert Half and Kelly's services are, my God. Yep. Meanwhile, when Congress expanded SNAP work requirements under the theory that unemployment is a personal failure to try harder, the Congressional Budget analysis found the change wouldn't save money. It would cost the public an estimated $2.1 billion in additional spending over 10 years. The policy was pushed through anyway. Was the underlying structure regulated afterwards? No, it hardened. The rise of one-click mobile applications and AI-driven automated screening has only scaled this zero marginal cost model further, widening the leverage imbalance. None of this required a central villain to intentionally design a malicious system. It's just a structural cost that went to zero for one side of the transaction and stayed at zero for 20 years because nobody whose revenue depended on that zero had a single economic reason to change it. Here's the dark economic joke of modern hiring innovation. What's the difference between the salaried employees of the talent acquisition industry and the job-seeking Americans using their platforms? Both spend 40 hours a week, years at a time, generating billions of dollars in revenue for HR tech industry. Only one of them gets paid for it. Whether it is culturally acknowledged or not, the online hiring ecosystem, a market operating without user reviews of the products on display or pricing mechanisms to punish vendors when they mistreat the workforce, means we haven't had a functional minimum wage in over 20 years. It's not just $7.25 an hour. It's been $0 an hour for at least over 20 years. And that rather undersells it given the mathematical givens. Stagnating wages for the fully employed, anyone? Increased productivity? Corporate employers are more than willing to fund this massive HR tech infrastructure disaster and stay completely silent about the systemic friction it creates. This structural imbalance serves 4 vital corporate functions. It squeezes out small businesses. Legacy hiring models require human capital to screen resumes. By shifting the hiring landscape into a hyper-automated, high-volume noise machine, major corporations effectively price out smaller competitors who lack the budget to purchase enterprise software suites just to filter through the noise. It's a tax, essentially. Creates a hiring tax, so they have trouble. It suppresses labor leverage. Flooding the market with frictionless one-click application creates an artificial sense of hyper-competition. Keeping workers in a constant state of algorithmic exhaustion ensures that they remain desperate enough to accept lower salary baselines. Talent pools function as Schrodinger's strike breakers. Nobody signs up for them, but they're just there, and suddenly you know. It offers free brand advertising, thousands upon thousands of free job boards with zero guidelines, and the email lists and scrape bots that recirculate them are nothing but savings on marketing money depending on your sector and your crowd. It erodes community tax bases. When local workforces are trapped in an extended, unproductive, and uncompensated job hunt, municipal strength degrades. The friction doesn't just stress the individual, it actively drains the local economic velocity and union power and relies on steady, predictable employment that relies on that. You have to try to not trouble the comfort of the powerful players with taxes and other things, with actual reality when you hold all the wealth. America has become like the end of the game of Monopoly, where no one can flip over the board. Anatomy of market blindness. In reality, I didn't realize, and how could I have known, aren't statements of innocence. When relationships with power dynamics collapse, they are admissions of guilt. Not knowing isn't innocence unless you were entitled to a relationship and labor from someone without being mindful of their needs, thoughts, wants, and hopes. Delusion of a market or a relationship is one or feedback of the people feedback it can integrate from the people it impacts. Not knowing how your market worked from anyone who read JOLTS hires to openings reports for a living is about as rational as the FDA not realizing they were supposed to care about the impact of medicines they approve. The CDC not realizing they were supposed to prevent diseases from negatively impacting the populace. HUD not knowing that people living in the apartments they had built was of any relationship to them. Job seekers haven't been shamed for giving bad feedback. They've been shamed for not fitting a comfortable narrative, not one that led to a safe economy, stable democratic politics, or social and civic safety, but one that made the powerful making ego-driven, easily visible errors that affected national stability in almost every sector feel comfortable for not doing the jobs they'd literally been paid and hired to do. The greatest secret of online hiring is that there's absolutely no secret at all. It is the oldest economic question in the book, cui bono, aka who benefits? The online labor market is far and away one of the most impressive public policy failures, journalistic failures, and academic failures in modern economic history. Excuse me. The market moved online, stripped vitamin C, information symmetry, and market discipline from itself, and subsequently, when the American workforce, the U.S. population at scale began experiencing sores and teeth falling out from how profitable keeping them from unemployment was, it wasn't described as scurvy by the people paid and trained to know what scurvy was. It was painted as a moral failing of the workforce. The labor market didn't lose its floor because no one was watching. It lost its floor because the people paid to watch it were confused as to why the harm they were witnessing was something they should care about. Check the research, a bunch of research points here. Find it on my Substack. The job applicant perspective. If the current online hiring apparatus represents the systemic stripping of economic vitamin C from the labor market, then introducing a transparent, candidate-driven feedback loop is the reintroduction of the nutrient. To fix this, we do not need top-down central planning. We need publicly available user data to make the market legible. Less radio traffic reporter and more Google Maps. We do not have to hide from the pain points of the modern job hunt. We need to track them so we can adapt to it. The mechanics of the structural rebalancing are wildly simple. Employers post roles, job seekers post anonymous feedback documenting their experience of the roles that were advertised, like the users of a customer experience That they are. The market adjusts to the sudden arrival of information symmetry. Again, we are not evaluating employment. We're evaluating hiring processes. No enterprise is forced by decree to change its internal behavior. Corporate employers remain entirely free to choose how they want to treat applicants. However, under this model, their choices are made structurally visible. So, your choice, if your reputation is important to you. By building an open, anonymous library of user reviews, hiring experiences, we introduce a functioning pricing mechanism to back into the labor market. When the cost of treating applicants like free computational data is no longer zero, the market will finally do what it should have done 20 years ago. Establish a bottom floor. Conclusion: markets without floors do not announce their collapse of the bang. The roof collapses with a bang, stock market. A labor market, it's much more dangerous. They just stop doing the job they were built to do. Remove one board at a time and tell the people falling through the slats it's their own fault for not holding on tighter. Recruiters on the ground see the harm, and they have no power to stop it. CEOs won't admit to funding it. Investors can't acknowledge they invested in it, lest they are liable for billions upon billions. And vendors are not going to confess to running an extraction machine. Who would do that? I was going to say, I definitely, nobody inside the system has an incentive to name it. But we don't need them to, because math doesn't require their permission to exist, and it's pretty straightforward. It explains and predicts, literally. It's just what it is. That leaves the rest of us. The people whose Tuesdays this actually costs. The people who actually have housing payments they want to pay. Who want a world where the vicious cycle, the doom loop, the Nash non-converging, doesn't collapse political stability further for our children. It is scary and difficult, and we have done scary and difficult things before. We build ships as we sail them. That's what we do as humans. We cross oceans, climb mountains. We do all sorts of things. At TJAP, we approach this economic wildfire like an American founding father who was more scientific than he's often given credit for. Honestly, I like this picture. It wasn't the weird dramatic stuff at the end. It was stuff in the middle. It was very eloquent. Reading it. Are we disposed to be of the number of those who, having eyes, see not, and having ears, hear not, the things which so nearly concern their temporal salvation? For my part, whatever anguish of spirit it may cost, I am willing to know the whole truth, to know the worst, and to provide for it. Science. Also Patrick Henry. So again, I gotta tell you, I resonate with a lot of those stuff, the American Revolution right now, but I think they're all systems thinkers too. This guy's a bunch of neurodivergents, if I've ever heard it. A bunch of people with PDA, didn't like sit to authority. I think we were founded by a group of neurodivergents. I'm just saying, Ben Franklin, come on. No way he was the normal dude of his era. That's that's autistic ADHD if I've ever seen it. Anyway, I'm biased, but still. We could just give up. We could. It's really rough out there. I'm not going to lie. We could just give up. But, or, I'm just saying, we could draw economic maps and make history books, I think my version is the better version. I feel like there's a reason that all the other markets do it too, because that's how an online marketplace works. This is a cultural change. The systems in your head are the hardest ones to shift sometimes, Forgot. One of this is maybe Dr. Sternman said it or something. I forgot who said it. But I read it once and I thought it was quite true. The way we think about things are the harder things to change. But I feel like the internet is almost like a manifestation of the way we think. It's not describing reality. It's describing the way we perceive reality, Anyway, these online marketplaces, I think, are fascinatingly revealing our inner frameworks on things, in a way. Regardless, that's it. Thanks very much. Please stay sane out there. Be kind to each other. The internet turned the world into a snowstorm. Way we solve it is by trusting the people on the roads. So stay sane.